Here's Joe Sherman, our pal, does a wonderful job. We got a lot to talk about with Joe. We got plenty of time here. Joe, I'm going to start you off with this. Has the best-of-3 format with the extra team, the idea that it's no longer one game, do you think that's going to propel more activity, knowing that it's not a one-game shootout for the teams trying to get to that spot, that they'd be more inclined to make moves at the deadline because it's a 3-game series? What's your take on that?
So, Chris, it's an interesting question, which I'm now thinking about for the first time, and I'd say that there's probably a balance, right? More teams will say, well, I'm willing to do something, but then do more teams say we're in it? And then you lose some sellers in this. Already, when you look at the sellers market, we're looking at because the playoffs are larger, we're looking at the really, really bad teams. And the problem is they're really bad teams because they don't have a lot of interesting players, especially close to free agency, who you might want to acquire. It's very secondary kind of players. It's hard to find the great player in this market. You know, if we're not going to get someone like Soto in the market, or Pittsburgh decides not to trade Brian Reynolds, it's really not an overwhelming market right now.
All right, is there a starting pitcher? I'm thinking of Bumgarner, although he hasn't been great. Is there a starting pitcher on a bad team that could be available, that could really help in a playoff series? You give him the ball in a third game, and it can be pretty accountable and give you 5-6 innings. Is there a guy like that available, that could be available come August 1st, Joe?
Yeah, you know, Chris, I think you have your longtime San Francisco Giant love, and I understand it. But I think the Diamondbacks, with the contract Bumgarner still has left, and the fact that he's just been okay as an Arizona Diamondback, they'd have a hard time just giving away the contract. So I don't see him as, you know, they definitely move him. And is there someone who thinks he has such great pedigree and history and fearlessness that they'd take a shot giving him the ball in a Game 3? Maybe. If not, you know, the market was hurt further the other day when Frankie Montas was hurt. We don't know his status going towards this. That leaves Luis Castillo. And look, there's always the question with someone like Castillo. There's not a long history where he's pitched big games. Do you trust giving him the ball in a big spot? He's obviously got tremendous stuff. But again, Chris, there's nobody who I'd put myself in the high end of people who really enjoy the trade market and the deadline as it gets closer and closer. It's hard for me to see the difference makers, but I always keep this in mind. We don't always see the difference makers. If on this date last year, Chris, I said, you know what's going to be the big difference? The Yankees are going to get Clay Holmes. That's going to matter for a long time. And the Braves are going to get Eddie Rosario, Jorge Soler, Adam Duvall, and Jock Peterson, and that's going to win them the World Series without Ronald Acuna. We would have had a big laugh about that, but it's actually what happened.
Yeah, it's a good point. Excellent. All right, the 3 pitchers in the NL East, DeGrom, Scherzer, and Soroka. Sounds like Soroka's still a long ways off, although he's going to pitch in a rehab game here eventually. Scherzer here obviously is right upon us, and then DeGrom too great in a rehab start the other day. Would it be fair for fans of those 2 teams to expect that by August 15th, all 3 of those pitchers could be in their rotation?
Yeah, you know, that's the optimist. There was a point where things were getting close with Soroka last year, and he tore his Achilles tendon again. You know, DeGrom has had a series of injuries. Scherzer obviously has a ton of innings and age. So you always want to be cautious when you're talking about this group. I'll throw in a wild card name that keeps interesting me. The Braves also believe at about the same time they get Soroka back, they might get Kirby Yates back. He was very quietly signed in the offseason. He hasn't pitched in a couple of years now. But there was a time where he was one of the better relief pitchers in baseball. Can they get that guy back? If they get that guy back and Soroka, I don't know that it's Scherzer and DeGrom, but I also still think that 1-26, the Braves have a better roster and a lot more pedigree at winning the division than the Mets, so I'd be curious about that. And I do think that both of those teams will be active trying to fix this. But, Chris, you know this. In New York, one of the big storylines the second that Scherzer is signed is pairing him with DeGrom and what that would look like. And we haven't seen that yet. And I was watching the Met game last night, and, Gary Cohn mentioned, you know, there's all those years where you're so excited about the Harvey, DeGrom, Syndergaard, Matz, Wheeler. You know, they pitched together one time through a rotation. So it's always, you know, you look at it and you say, wow, what will it look like when it's there? And then, you know, let's see it be there before we get too overly excited.
100%. All right, listen, if I was a Yankee fan or if I was in a Yankee front office, alarmed is too strong, but I would be a little concerned of what I saw with the 5 games against Houston. I mean, let's call it like we see it. The Astros did not have one at bat in either of those series where they trailed, because when they lost, the Yankees won a game with walk-off scenarios. So, and they pitched great. They beat them 2-1. Everybody, and Verlander, the Yankees never hit. Valdez is a good big game pitcher who kind of throws you off. That would worry me a little bit about the 5 games against Houston that we just saw, with 2 more still to come in Houston. But if you were Brian Cashman, how concerned would you be? What warts did you see in those 5, Joe? Let me hear.
Look, well, we were just talking about starting pitchers still to come. Lance McCullers is working his way back and is probably a few weeks away from joining it. And look, it's not 2017, but anybody who watched the playoff series in 2017 and saw what McCullers did to the Yankees will, remember how dominant he was, and will give them more pitching. Look, anything can happen in a short series. So once the Yankees get into a division series, 3 out of 5, if Cole blows up or Cortez blows up, you could end up out of the series. But it does feel like we're at a collision course where it's going to be the Astros and Yankees for the 4th time in the postseason since 2015. The last 2 have been in the ALCS. One of those is clearly tainted, right? The 2017 one with the sign stealing. But the one thing you know about the Astros is they're not going to be afraid to play the Yankees. If the Yankees win 105, 110, 115, whatever they win, they clearly know that they could stand in the ring with them. And at some point, the Yankees are going to have to get over this. Chris, I know you love baseball history. When I'm watching that series, and I was at a bunch of the games, including the no-hitter that the Astros threw, the thing that kept coming to mind were all those years where the Royals couldn't beat the Yankees, the George Brett Royals. Over and over, they knocked, and then finally, they knocked out the Yankees. They won a World Series. The Yankees are going to have to beat the Astros to get through. No matter how many games they win this year, the 2 teams match up well. The Astros aren't afraid. They've built over the team into a new team since 2017. Go look at who the best players on the team are. Tucker wasn't on 2017. Alvarez wasn't. Pena, the shortstop, wasn't. All the pitching pretty much that isn't Verlander or McCullers wasn't. This is a team that has built over and stayed at the top of the sport. And, the Yankees might win 115 games, but until proven otherwise, the Astros are the team to beat in the American League.
Yeah, it's fair, and I don't disagree. Teams that have not been in a postseason, that would like to make a little noise in a postseason, and these opportunities don't come around very often. I'll put Toronto in there, the Guardians in there, San Diego in there, Philadelphia, I'll put them in there. I would think they would do everything under their power. They uncover every stone to find some help in the next 4 or 5 weeks to put them over the top and give them a chance to play October baseball. I would think that's a fair read, right?
I think it is a fair read, Chris, but I keep going back. If you and I sat down and we put on paper who we think is going to be available hitting and pitching, we're not going to be overwhelmed by it. So really it's going to be about who finds their Clay Holmes, who finds their Jock Peterson, who finds, like it could be people we don't imagine, that won't move the needle when we're all here scrambling around on August 2nd on deadline day, and there's no sexy names traded. But the reality is there will be people who make a difference. We won't know it until real time. And just if I was thinking about a few of those, I think Cleveland's situation's fascinating. They got a burgeoning farm system. How much of that did they use to go after the AL Central? The Padres are right up against the luxury tax number. Do they blow by it to go ahead and take a moment where their run prevention, the combination of their pitching, especially starting pitching and defense, is so good? Do they make a run to try to even overtake the Dodgers and win the NL West? And the Blue Jays, they have some starting pitching concerns now because Ryu is out for the season, and Jose Berrios, who they made a big gamble on in the offseason by extending him, I think it was like $131 million, has not pitched well. But again, it's hard to see the marketplace where there's the difference-making starter. Maybe they're the team that ends up with Luis Castillo, but there's going to be a lot of teams in play for him, and then the question of, does Cincinnati pull the trigger and trade him?
Yeah, excellent job, Joe. Always a pleasure to talk. We will keep in touch. Thanks very much. Keep up the good work.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks for coming on.